Trump is talking about Greenland again. Buy it, is what he's saying. And depending upon who you listen to, maybe even take Greenland by force, which isn't necessarily crazy because a White House official recently said the US military is always an option. And Greenlanders, by the way, as well as many Europeans, have responded with a very clear no. But here's the twist. This isn't even a new genre of American foreign policy. By the end of this video, you're going to realize why, because I'm going to show you that one quiet line in a century-old treaty that makes today's Greenland conversation feel uncomfortably familiar. When US leaders talk about Greenland, they are usually saying the same two words: national security. That's the public argument today: Arctic positioning, great power competition, and strategic access. And whether you love Trump's approach or hate it, there's a basic historical fact that matters here. America has a long record of trying to solve strategic anxieties with real estate. Sometimes that meant war, sometimes it meant annexation, but sometimes, very literally, it meant a purchase. But purchases from foreign countries of land isn't as straightforward or easy as a process that you might think. The part that people miss when they say just buy Greenland is that in the US system, a purchase like this traditionally runs through a two-step process. Step one, a treaty. The Constitution gives the president treaty power with the advice and consent of the Senate. This means that 2/3 of senators have to approve the treaty. Once they approve it, it goes to step two, the money step. No federal money leaves the Treasury unless Congress appropriates it by law. That's both the House and the Senate. So even if a president negotiates a deal, and by the way, even if the Senate ratifies that deal, you still need the entirety of Congress to say, great, now show me the invoice, let's pay it. Understanding how the United States can purchase territory from foreign countries is just the first part of this narrative and understanding everything that's going on about Greenland. However, we're going to do something new. I want you to keep Greenland in your mind, but jump back with me into the early 1900s. Imagine this. The US had a strategic problem. Global conflict was all around. Washington worried that an enemy power could use a key set of islands as a foothold in the Caribbean sea lanes, right near routes that the US cared deeply about, and to be frank, still cares deeply about today. So the US negotiated a treaty for those islands. Sound familiar? The Senate approved it in 1916, and the transfer happened in 1917 with payment of $25 million in gold coin for 1916 value. Today, that's roughly about $277 million. But remember the two-step. Congress had to fund it. So in March 1917, Congress passed an act to govern the newly acquired islands and appropriated the purchase price as part of implementing the deal. And today, you know those islands as the US Virgin Islands. Now, here's the part I've been teasing. Those islands weren't just owned by some random country. They were owned by the same kingdom that Greenland belongs to today. And the US didn't just talk Greenland, by the way, in modern times. In 1946, President Harry Truman made a formal offer to Denmark, $100 million in gold for Greenland, because the US saw it as strategically vital in the early Cold War. Now, you know, Denmark said no, but the key point is this. The purchase idea itself was already mainstream enough to be an actual offer for Harry Truman in 1946. So when you hear buy Greenland today, you're not watching something brand new. You're watching a rerun of a very old strategic instinct. You can see this old strategic instinct for Greenland in a treaty line that ties everything together. Now, remember that century-old treaty that we talked about before we went over President Truman? Well, in the 1916 to 1917 agreement, where the U.S. bought the islands that became the U.S. Virgin Islands, the U.S. included a declaration that it would not object to Denmark extending its political and economic interests across all of Greenland. So yes, Greenland was literally in the paperwork the last time the U.S. paid the kingdom for territory, which brings us back to President Trump. Even if a president wants Greenland, history says the path isn't a tweet. It's a treaty and then a budget. And if you really want the cliffhanger for 2026, this is the question. In 2026, would the Senate ever ratify a treaty to purchase Greenland? And would Congress, with the House and Senate, ever vote to fund a deal like that? And to be frank, who would we be paying it to? Denmark? Greenland? A little bit of both. If you enjoyed this breakdown of what is happening right now around Greenland and the history of the United States and its instinct with Greenland and interest in Greenland, please make sure to subscribe, hit that like button. If you got any questions, any thoughts, comment below. We try to respond to every single question as they come in. Thanks for watching.